The Princess Seserakh, the daughter of the High King of the Kargish lands, at first in the 6th Earthsea novel by Ursula K. Leguin, The Other Wind, appears to be just something like a pawn or even just a piece in a game that is being played between the two kings, the High King of the Kargish lands, who now is willing to enter into negotiations with the King, Leguin, of the rest of Earthsea, and it's proposed that Leguin ought to give this Kargish princess the ring of peace, that is to marry her and thereby become the son-in-law of the High King. And Leguin really doesn't like this. He feels as if he's being played, and part of it is due to the fact that the Kargish princess seems totally out of place within the court of Havnor. She's dressed from head to toe in a red veil. Nobody can actually see her. She doesn't know any of the language. And so she's kind of a cipher. She's a symbol at best of things. And Tenar can talk with her because Tenar, of course, is Kargish. And she tells Leguin what's going on. And so one of the key themes in the development of this character is going to be fear on the one hand and courage. Early on, she says, "She's frightened," Tenar said. And then Leguin says, "So she hides in her tent. Who does she think I am?" "How could she know what you are?" He scowled. "How old is she?" "Young, but a woman." "I can't marry her," he said with sudden resolution. "I'll send her back." And Tenar says, "A returned bride is a dishonored woman. If you send her back, Thol might kill her to keep the dishonor from his house. He'll certainly consider you intend to dishonor him." And so there's a crisis here. This is one of the third problems facing Leguin and Earthsea at the beginning of the work. So she's hiding behind her veils. She's in her tent. When he sends her to the river house, she stays there. And we find out that she is indeed fearful. She's fearful of a number of different things. She has a conversation with Tenar, and it's through these conversations that we get to know the princess. She's feeling afraid of the water and seasickness because she had never left the desert. She had never gone to the beach of the island, and then suddenly she's placed on a ship and has to sail all the way to Havnor, seasick the entire time, not actually knowing what's going on with herself, other than she's being sent to be, essentially a gift in a set of exchanges going on. So there's that. She's also afraid of being treated as just a stupid woman in her own words, and also perhaps as deserving that. So she says at one point, "I know what I am here in that big city, Awabath, where my father is. I was a stupid, ignorant desert woman, a Feyagat." This means a veiled person. "The city women sniggered and poked each other whenever they saw me, the bare-faced whores. And here it's worse. I can't understand anybody, and they can't understand me. And everything is different. I don't even know what the food is. It's sorcerer food. It makes me dizzy. I don't know what the taboos are. There aren't any priests to ask, only sorcerer women, all black and barefaced." So this is a big problem for her. She not only feels out of place like a tourist might, right? Or somebody who's just suddenly gone to another place. She doesn't understand what anybody's saying. At first, before she learns that there's another language, she thinks they're just making fun of her the way that the city women had before. And so that's a central concern. She's also worried, unnecessarily, about being sacrificed to dragons. And we find out that, here we go, as soon as Tenar shows up, she says, here we go, "A tall, vigorous young woman, full of emotion, knocked her right off her feet, but held her up in strong arms. 'Oh, Lady Arha, save me, save me,' she was crying. And Tenar says, 'Princess, what's wrong?' The princess was in tears of terror or relief or both at once, and all Tenor could understand of her laments and pleas was a babble of dragons and sacrifice. And so Tenor says, there are no dragons near Havnor, nobody's being sacrificed. What's this all about? What have you been told? The women said the dragons were coming and they'd sacrifice a king's daughter and not a goat because they're sorcerers, and I was afraid. And then Tenor says, your women are ignorant and don't know enough Hardic to understand what people tell them, and you don't know any Hardic at all, And then a little bit later, Seserakh tells her this story about the dragons there at Her, and she says, don't you have the spring sacrifice in Atuan? Tenor shook her head. Well, that's why I got scared, you see, because it can be a human sacrifice. If things weren't going well, they'd sacrifice a king's daughter. Otherwise, it would just be some ordinary girl, but they haven't done that, even that for a long time, not since I was little, but they haven't done that. My father defeated all the other kings. Since then, they've only sacrificed a she-goat and an ewe, but maybe they'll sacrifice me here. And Tenor says, no, that's not what's going on. The dragons are coming to talk, so don't worry about that. So that fear goes away right away. There's another fear as well that she's going to have to work through, and it has to do with marrying Lebanon. And this is stemming from the beliefs that they have. And here we go. She tells this story of the Verdernan, this agreement. And then finally, Seserakh says, I have to marry him, and so I will be lost. What does that mean to be lost? And Tenor says, why are you lost if you marry him? So here's the explanation. If I marry him, I have to give him my name. If he speaks my name, he steals my soul. That's what the accursed sorcerers do, so they always hide their names. But if he steals my soul, I won't be able to die. I'll have to live forever without my body, a bird that can't fly, and never be reborn. And Tenor says, that's why you hid your name? I gave it to you, my friend. I honor the gift, my friend, Tenor said energetically, but you can say your name to anybody you want here. They can't steal your soul with it. Believe me, Seserakh, and you can trust him. He won't do you any harm. The girl had caught her hesitation. Because, Tenor is actually concerned about the fact that Lebanon has this anger towards Seserakh, right? But he wishes he could, she said. Tenor, my friend, I know what I am here. And this is where she talks about the big city. And then she says, I can see out of my veil, I saw his face. He's very handsome. He looks like a warrior, but he's a black sorcerer and he hates me. Don't say he doesn't, because I know he does. And I think when he learns my name, he'll send my soul to that place forever. And Tenor actually doesn't give her the name to Lebanon right away, honoring this somewhat mistaken request, but she's very worried about this. She's worried about the hostility. Now, things begin to change when they decide that they're going to have to sail to Gaunt, and Tenor says, you really need to take Seserakh, or not Seserakh, but the princess along on this. And Lebanon says, oh no, that would be a terrible idea. And there's a little bit of a conflict there between the two, Tenor and Lebanon. And this is quite important, what happens here. He says, she's completely unfitted for such a journey. And Tenor says, I know nothing of the kind. She has no education. Here Tenor says something really important. She's intelligent, practical, and courageous. Here, is the first time where she's being described not as fearful, but as courageous. She's aware of what her station requires of her. She hasn't been trained to rule, but then what can she learn boxed up here in the river house with her servants and some court languages? To speak the language in the first place, Lebanon responds, and Tenor says she's doing that. I'll interpret for her when she needs it. And eventually he says, the princess has no place on this voyage, and Tahanu says, or rather, Tenor says, Tahanu and Irian both say she should come with us. Master Onyx says that, like Alder of Town, her being sent here cannot be an accident. Lebanon says, I cannot permit it. Her ignorance and experience would make her a serious burden, and I can't put her at risk. Relationships with her father. And then Tenar says this. In her ignorance, as you call it, she showed us how to answer Ged's questions. You are as disrespectful of her as her father is. You speak of her as a mindless thing. Tenar's face was pale with anger. If you're afraid to put her at risk, ask her to take it herself. So Lebanon says, all right, I accept your judgment. Please tell her if she wishes to come, she may do so. And then Tenar says, no, you need to go tell her. It's you who should tell her that. So he says, all right, I'll go. I'll ask her. And first he says, let's have her come here. And then he gets impatient. He's like, I'll go there. And what happens? Something that changes the dynamic and the relationship between them. There's a wonderful passage here. The breeze from the water made the veils tremble and shimmer so that the figure did not appear solid, but delicate, moving, shivering like the willow foliage. It seemed to shrink, to shorten. She was making her courtesy to him. He bowed to her. They both straightened up and stood in silence. Princess, Lebanon said with a feeling of unreality, hearing his own voice, I am here to ask you to come to Roke Island. She said nothing. He saw the fine red veils part in an oval as she spread them with her hands, long-fingered, golden-skinned hands, held apart to reveal her face in the red shadow. He could not see her features clearly. She was nearly as tall as he, and her eyes looked straight at him. My friend Tenar, she said, say, king to see king, face and face. I say, yes, I will. Half understanding, Lebanon bowed again. You honor me, my lady. Yes, she said, I honor you. He hesitated. This was different ground entirely, her ground. She stood there straight and still, the gold edging of her veils shivering, her eyes looking at him out of the shadow. Tenar and Tahanu and Ormirian agree it would be well if the princess of the Kargad lands were with us on Roke Island. So I ask you to come with us, to Roke Island. On ship, she said, and suddenly made a little moaning, plaintive noise. Then she said, I will to come. He bowed, he left her as he had been taught to leave the presence of his father, the prince, not turning his back, but stepping backwards. Courageous, Tenar had called her. He did not understand, but he knew that he had been in the presence of courage. All the anger that had filled him, brought him here, was gone, vanished. He had not been sucked down and suffocated, but brought up short in front of a rock, a high place in clear air, a truth. This is the first real encounter between Princess Seserakh and King Lebanon, and there's more yet to come, but here he realizes that he is in the presence of courage. A courage that isn't a lack of fear, but a dealing with fear. On the voyage, she has to deal with seasickness. And, to the extent that Tenar even gets a little bit ticked off with her, right? And she says, she's not sick. Seserakh, you're not sick. You're afraid of being sick. Get hold of yourself. Come out on deck. Fresh air will make all the difference. Fresh air and courage. So this is quite interesting. Tenar is saying, your fears are really fears of succumbing to your fears. Don't let that happen to you. Choose to do something that will help you out. You have to have the courage, but fresh air will also help you. Seserakh then says to her, oh, my friend, make me courage. And Tenar says, you have to make it yourself, princess. Come on, just try it out on deck for a minute. And they get out on the deck. This whole idea of making yourself courage is something important. Then they look and they see Irian, who's having no trouble at all. And Seserakh says, she makes herself courage. Ah? And then Tenar said, she doesn't need to make it, I think. She's fearless. So this is interesting. Irian doesn't really possess courage as such in the way that these human people can, because she is courage. She just is what she is, right? Dragons are their very nature. human beings have to try to overcome and deal with their fears. And a little bit later, when Lebanon is talking with her, she says to him, I will not to fear. And now that could be understood as just kind of her broken-hearted, right? I'm not going to fear. But it can also be understood as choosing, as imposing one's own will upon one's own unruly self and saying, I will not give in to fear. And so that's quite important. Lebanon also, feels bad about this and says, hey, can we do anything for her? Is there any possibility of helping her out? And this leads to something else where she overcomes another one of her worries and fears, right? So Onyx and Alder and Sepal consult, and they decide to give her a talisman. The princess's long-fingered hand emerged from the red and gold veils. The wizard placed in it a queer little black and white object, dried seaweed braided around a bird's breastbone. A petrel, because they ride the storm, Onyx said, shamed-faced. The princess bowed her unseen head and murmured thanks in Kargish. The fetish disappeared within her veils. And so this is her accepting being part of a culture that she felt totally afraid of and separated from as well. Finally, we have something even bigger happening on the voyage. This is changing the very status of things. So they may see Roke Island soon. This is Lebanon talking with the princess. And when they had gained this tiny haven, where they're visible to the rest of the ship, but they could turn their backs on it, as much privacy as royalty can hope for, the princess turned to him and pushed back the veil from her face. He had intended to ask what he could do for her, but the question seemed both inadequate and irrelevant. He said nothing. She said, Lord King, in her I am Fayagat. In Roke Island I am to be king's daughter of Kargad. To be this I am not Fayagat. I am Bareface, if it please you. After a moment, he said, Yes, princess, this is well done. It please you? Very much. Yes, I thank you, princess. Barazu, she said, a regal acceptance of thanks. Her dignity abashed him. Her face had been flaming red when she first put back the veil. There was no color in it now, but she stood straight and still and gathered up her forces for another speech. And here she tells him about the Verdurnan, which is going to be very instrumental in figuring out what's going on. But bearing her face, choosing to go without the veils, is also, overcoming her fears and demonstrating courage. The final thing that we have to discuss is the ending of the story, in which, as Seserakh says, Oh, my friend, she's talking to Tenor, what will happen to us? The dead are coming here. Do you feel them like the tide rising across that wall? I think nobody can stop them. All the dead people from the graves of all the islands of the West, all the centuries. And a little bit later, when everybody else is going to be going off to try to break the wall, Seserakh says, what do we do? They are all gone on the dragon's way. What are we to do, Tenor? And Tenor says, we are to keep the house. Seserakh drops to her knees. She'd seen Lebanon lying near the doorway, stretched face down in the grass. He isn't dead, I think, oh my dear Lord King. Don't go, don't die. And Tenor says, he's with them, stay with him. Keep him warm, keep the house, Seserakh. And that's the only way in which she can do her duty, perform the courage, is to do something that is an action that is also a waiting. And what we find just a little bit later is that, here we go, she's crouching beside Lebanon, her arms across him, protecting him, daring any wizard to touch him. Her eyes flashed. She held Lebanon's short steel dagger naked in her hand. And Osver says, to her, Ganai, her title in Kargish. Her eyes flashed up to him. Oh, may Atwa Wulla be thanked and the mother praised forever. Lord Azur, make these accursed sorcerers go away. Kill them. They have killed my king. She held out her dagger to him by its slender steel blade. No, princess, he went with the dragon Irian. But this sorcerer brought him back to us. Let me see him. He's cold. It was a hard way back. Take him in your arms, princess. Keep him warm. And that is what she does. And he does come back to life. And we find at the very end that they are married. This is in Tenor's own words. There was a council meeting, the king's council for the betrothal. There will be a grand wedding. But they were truly married already with Elpharon's ring, our ring. And she recounts, Lebanon came and stood here, see, on my left. Then Seserakh came and stood here on my right, in front of Morad's throne. I held up the ring, the way I did when we brought it to Havnor, remember, and looked far in the sunlight. Lebanon took it in his hands and kissed it and gave it back to me, and I put it on her arm. It just went over her hand. She's not a little woman, Seserakh. Oh, you should see her, Ged. What a beauty she is, what a lion. He's met his match, and everyone shouted, and there were festivals and so on, and so I could get away. And so they are brought together in part because their relationship has completely transformed. She is now no longer just a pawn in a game that's being played between kings, but rather the partner and the lover of the king and his equal through her courage.